Han de la ye guen ye do ko ne ra ga sho za won de chon zen ze che ye ya bo guen ye lo san se da je ba ne de she zo de ye na ga se de be de che ze la ma ye be zo ga je a lo de be so na che jo de bo ye je ge ya shu zo zo xie jie chen gu zha be lu zhi ge zai na be ye ju le xie so cha be be ye lai me ze be ton de be de la zhan ze ye wo che ye na zo me do che xian do be na ze che ja wo zhang ye zhe che zhen ya zo de se na xian zhou tie lai che ma be gan xian dong me de ne sa ma le ma ye ye mi ga je je ma tie ma ran dong ma so ye me de zhou nie ne ye ma ta be zo zo sha nie me de ma de zhou la ze she ye ba be ta zhou de ye ye bo bo ye ye la jian ze dai zai zan ba dai be ye ra che zhe la ma dai ba ye na ma ye che gue ga la che ze de ne che da la zan be de je ma la sa ye je ye cha wa ma do zo na ma da be se ye le xian ba so jo go lai cha do me nga ya ta me na ngo so go ra na ne se de ma do me no de ba ra jo ta zo je ne sa be ge de yang da zhuo wa gue lai gan be da ke ya ba ra je ze lo zan cha Bonde soy gere don da je xie wang da me de ne be je dan de wang dan de bang du da jian den jiang den 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 yo sa jie be ye yo ye me do da ri ro li xie ni de ye mo de san ye jian do me de wo ye lo ge yo no mo lo xie lo xue yan bo ro yo ye da gu ru ra na ma de la wa ni yan da ya me so ye jo nam lo jiang ju mo lo da ne jiao zu da ge ju ju ge be so nam je ro la ben je san je ru che lo so je jo na la jiang ju mo lo da ne jiao zu da ge ju ju ge be so nam je ro la ben je san je ru ba ra jo che lo so je jo na la jiang ju mo lo da ne jiao zu je da ge ju ju ge be so nam je ro la ben je san je ru ba ra jo Let us cultivate the altruistic motivation or the bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should participate in this Lamrim discourse, discourse on the stage of the path to enlightenment by Manjushri Lama Tsongkhapa. Allow me to read about a couple of pages from the Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, volume number 3 in the English translation, page 282, to give you the blessing of lineage oral transmission, followed by explication.
行动起着了，记得别他你那些的那样就过的，解决我不有不是这不能让些没做这边那不解决这不行。如果的在我那对不的好的样行的，你别这个东，我不准备他先要空。给嘛了别些那行的你吧，就说这些没人说别这边这些行的嘛，那现在也把嘛也。现在我们这年年的到我们的同盟对吧？我们的同盟到我们的同盟的话，那么我们路上的话，那么的，的话，那了同盟的话，他就能下他接下来没有就让了你们这。天天的几天的，那么的接着那能见面，把这天的让也来多一些吧，第一天把些都提多那张些也没错，日月这玩那现在的那么的好的也没把的把现在的一边的日月的嘛你不现在给我看了你，这当然也现在给了把那张些没这边的别这把没。Repeat number Jevade, Tony Jedevade, Tanya Vishiva, Rangova, Nimesa, Java, you know, dinner, dear, you do not run over the topic. Are you the Java, you know, I know, Jevade, number Java, repeat, Shintamani with the Rango Russian, Mimi, the Elana, Rashi, you're the Yana, you're the Yamano, numbers be a table and a master journey, showered. 现在有你们那这些的也拉这边的也拉这边接受不得个也拉这边的也拉这边不去。给的没的新的些吧，一般那胖路拉说吧也拉说吧，没就让那的那的大朋友的俺就新人大把同我可能也。胖路拉说吧的新的些大把新的人呢，人真是新人的名字都新的些问题这。朋友老师我那么现在都这我们新电影了，没了第一了，今年现在没讲新电影了，以后万一那第一这新电影那了，那样了这就很，因为没很没讲朋友老师我那么多人给车一那里对，赢了也进赢了，下一的那个第二赢了也了这没也了就不没能说些呀，也了咱这边那也了没同的。新的这呢，那没别一那别这也那个那些说别的那些我什么名义，这我就过呢，特别是用这了小那些店了，这别过那新的他人到我介绍这不就这么这些的名义，这我看他一把的，那么他一把的，他要那不这我没我记得那这别过呢，看了我这问的，这这边了这的下一节。现在第一些我一些这你就那了不觉得这送吧大肉，这第一下这大群众的第一下可是，咱们主要的现在外国的咱们主要些，那个他这个出现了把别加瓦些的是的。
So Geshe read from page 282, volume number 3 in the English translation, Labrin Chemo, to the top of page 285. That was the blessing of lineage oral transmission. And now he started to give explanation. Just to go back, we left off, we have been establishing a selflessness, and a chariot or Shingda in Tibetan is used as an example to establish what selflessness is, what Tangme is. And so that once we understand this example of a chariot that demonstrates selflessness, then we can apply the same understanding or the concept to other phenomena and understand their selflessness.
这些那些新的变点的所有设备被是理解对吧？长了不把老师吧，那么就吧，小玩意了，先要理解就是对吧？对呢，西巴老师吧，那么多吧呀，多把的不把老师吧，那就是准备所有设备也切吧就对吧？要搞的所有设备了，让新教没呗，这到让新没别行了。就是这个没得切入是，这地嘞，现在摆这个，你现在养了这他这呢，你现在大多数人嘛，你我这个，你碰把了不去可怜呢，让个养了说话些呢，碰把都是呢，你对这些说吧嘞，这个碰把些个，大多数你也要嘛的是，对这就我这个在大学的时候啊，现在对这就是说吧了，就是说吧了，呢，多把，你碰把了说吧呢，就是这边说了说呗。也切吧就要搞的，是这然也切吧就是这个现在他让心是吧是让心是吧是对吧？我都被大把怎么都这，你这让心这个你这也切吧是要嘛的是。没得别切着啥，这他人就过来，你都说说这个内容了，碰了些讲是我嘛呢，叫没不说说讲没第一些样，第一些样这他也没的，些说是，但我们就告诉。那你说说他念了，你实际上呢，现在摆的时候是吧？你说了说，那不把老师知道了，你不给，到不了当时嘛都觉得，你有定的这个让心这么要嘛的是，你叫少讲，你第一些呢，听到也没这事，就是有的第一些呢，你也的当中在你不给，让生意这个也的，你底下刚看样你，不把老师不生意下头嘛的是说是吧？
So those who are using electronic version of this Lamrim Chemo in English translation, the things we are discussing are under the sub-point showing that the chariot exists imputedly without intrinsic existence. So in the hard copy on page 282, somewhere in the middle, as Geshe explained, that when we look at a chariot in its 7 different parts, so what we see is that a chariot is neither intrinsically, how to say, one with its parts, nor it exists intrinsically as being distinctive or different from its parts. And in other words, that chariot is just an imputed reality of phenomenon. But if you try to locate that imputed reality, in the aggregate or the collection of chariot parts, we are not able to find something that is called this is it. We cannot find intrinsically or characteristically existent a chariot. And so just as a chariot is an imputed reality of phenomenon, in the same way other phenomena such as a pot or a container lacks intrinsic existence. So in towards the bottom of page 282, you can see a citation from Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way. And Madhyamik Avatar, where it is stated, as Geshe explained, that a pot, pumba, or what is called a vase. Conventionally, a vase has certain characteristics, conventional characteristics. It is round-bellied, one, and all of that. But there's nothing intrinsic about any or every part of a pot or a vase, and it's simply an imputed reality phenomenon imputed onto its collection of parts. But if you try to locate what's simply imputed as a pot, we cannot find a pot that exists substantially, a pot that's substantially existent, meaning as intrinsically existent. So we should understand what that means is that a pot, like any other phenomena, lacks intrinsic nature or intrinsic existence.
这些是给的新的不也 rang yin la diwe ye ma yin na to de la so ba di che yi ma yin je de da le ye da ye mi shi nyam na se da de le ti zi do to de shi ju de in bu be sen yi che da di shi wo de shi xin da de bu ba de ni ye ma yin na to de shi ju shi ju de no se da shi ju de ma la se to de shi ju shi se de da ye bi wa
no, so.
我现在，那不把这个东北学了是轻易嘛，一般觉得是，知道的也有没学人啊，我知道也是我是，是的，但普遍轻易来，那东北学有学过嘛，东北学有头人都学过了，东北学过我嘛，我就是我噻。
No, so.
看个到底啊，当这边什么说呢？你不把还也没对的，到底了说的是也不把对不把面对的，现在呢？ 多的这么样，这个吧就罗啥，我记他这两的了呀，东西是去就是那个平板这个什么东西，哎，那到的话，这下面说话的平板这个嘛的说的，
No, so.
我提示。
So we're at the bottom of page 282 and top of page 283. What you find there is a qualm and a response to that qualm. And so one of the arguments that is being refuted is that the shape of a pot or a vase, Pumba, is not a vase. Okay? And our critic says, well, if that's not a vase, then how can then a round bellied, which is a characteristic of pot, cannot be a defining characteristic of a pot. Okay? Because pot is defined as a todir, means it's round bellied, and that its stand is narrowed down, right? How to translate English very eloquently, it doesn't start to make much sense there. So that cannot be a defining characteristic of a pot. Now the response to that is, well, round bellied alone is not a defining characteristic of a pot, because a pot is also chutyor, that which can hold water or liquid, chu. And it serves a purpose, right? It serves a functional purpose. So if you look at the defining characteristic of a pot, it's better todir, round-bellied, chutyor, that holds water, that is serves a functional purpose. So that is the whole defining characteristic of a pot, not just a round-bellied, object. So conventionally, a pot is defined as that which is round-bellied, holds water, and serves a functional purpose. But that is not an intrinsically existent pot.
我这他这了之后帮我的我嘛的那人些没这位这个，这个就是那么多有个的新的这位满意呢，新的没有个，这但是今天的新的的产业。 到那下面就了，这样没得新的东西去越介绍了，同样一弄是第一季新的了，说不那有万年有的现在是那，这了之后我嘛的什么什么明显的了，什么什么明显的去看的那到时在你把开两个了，不对个，然后有没有这个这个那满年那的，的，可是碰把的新的都没有了，这没得呢，那今天呢那边新的所是这了。 今天呢，新的产业喜欢新的火炉塞的，今天产业要了完了，钱人完就了。这样没得对新疆我们些呢，新的体育塞就没得了。去牛一些呢牛塞的是吧？去些呢新的速度塞，新的车的是吧？我介绍了说同行业的，第一新的了说你要把你的些东西，现在就在第一些今天呢，因为新的牛、新的车塞去，新的红塞产业都个的。 那到都这样是你就没呢，你的产业的这个嘛的，你的生意刚刚这个门都是，什么明星是爱的电视看。
So now we are on page 283, subpoint eliminating objections to that, essentialist objection. So what essentialists say, in Tibetan, essentialists refer to a mind-only school of thought, Chitta margins and school below. According to them, things must be findable, under analysis, right? If we look for whatever that thing is, there has to be something that should be considered as whatever that thing is. Something has to be findable, right? If nothing is findable under analysis, then for them that does not exist at all. Things could not be existent. So that's what essentialists say. So the essentialists are coming back. So you know what? But a chariot, the example you use, it has to exist intrinsically. Otherwise, how can you tell people, hey, bring me a chariot? I need a chariot. Make a new chariot for me, or buy me a one, right? How can you talk about making one, buying one, get me one chariot, right? If a chariot does not exist, something that is findable, and the conventional, language they've used, hey, get me a chariot, right? That language would not exist. How could it exist? There isn't a something called chariot that is findable. So it has to exist essentially or intrinsically, according to essentialists. So Mind-Undru school of thought, Chitta Martins, and schools below. So they insist that things have to be findable, or they really don't exist.
anything that she only say shaji ganga take him to pambaki say shaji ganga me be do seda because seda do those what is oma ba dire su zu ro
No.
that is the ti te len jungir par je de khar jaye na da su la ya ganga shaji ganga me de ne chonosu ba do oma ba shaji te go ris kharis chonosu yene rangshin chobu su do rangshin men me su da rangshin choba sai zan yo ma ris 대 매비엔서 다다데 신당원지 취해지세요. 뒤에 가게 자지 매대베디 초론 좀 초론 저도 뭐도 어머 발 저도 말이. 어머 배 타이에서도 이거 되면 다송선 저거 말아. 지대나 타이 다도 맞아 그걸 저거 셔다. 뒤에 좀 강가된 초론서 발 도시오. 내가 늘 중대디 좀더 가서 중대래 좀더 뭐 노래 여봐도 너는 주인송 당보디 신당원지 저를 지대베 타이에는 제다는 매어 줘디 제중어버 이어 저거나 랑시 유미제베 리그베 나바제는 저거실라 리그바디 저는 두부터 컨데 신대 민이 비쳤다 세 이해자 매우시다 다 매우샤로로 뭐부터 탑 신야 매우시다 제제 다고야 조시기 사실 저하게는 탑시 디레지고 탑 신야 민도스 때문에 켈란 베시는 신대 매우제소 디시 유미 소위 리그베 제베 디 신다 많이 버는 신다 요만 시제요 뭐뭐 저번에는 알레 디한테 가가르샤 다 치도 가지 가자 다다 애니 신다 정신이 뭐라나 애니 샤지 되게 민두세야지 좀데 애니 초론 주고도 애니 딱도 제에서 초론 딱도 제는 요뭐도 딱도 맞아 지딘 타에 여번 조신 거도 왔어 딱도 제는 이야자는 요 말이지 때문에 애니 자제 탐지 매대비 좀디 결혼 주도 어머베네 당노제네 마이나 타이도 더베도 이번 주도 리세다 좀요면 좀 수주야 강가 전화파 주도 시거다.
So we are in the middle of page 283, and we're looking at the response. So essentialists, Chitta Martins and schools below, insist that things must be findable. Under analysis, we try to locate them. They have to be findable. They must exist essentially or intrinsically. Otherwise, so they couldn't be, existent. And that includes a chariot. A chariot, in the world, when people talk about, make me a new chariot, or bring me a chariot, or buy me a chariot, a chariot has to be findable, right? Otherwise, those, conventionals or the terms have no meaning at all. That's what the essentialists insist. Now, in response to that, in the Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way commentary, it says that all the those alleged fallacies really belong to you, the essentialists, not to us, because for us, a chariot serves a purpose. Chariot is nothing but an imputed reality of phenomenon. In the world, when people talk about a chariot, bring me a chariot, make me a chariot, buy me a chariot, whatever, they are talking it more in a conventional sense, not in the sense of something to be necessarily findable, intrinsically findable. People in the world do not think about, in that mindset. They simply use the terms, in a very conventional sense. And so we would say that a chariot exists as an imputed reality or phenomenon, and it serves its purpose like at that level or on that level. Yeah? And if you insist that a chariot must exist intrinsically in and of itself, such a chariot does not exist at all. So all the fallacies that you're pointing out, right, in our system position, those fallacies belong to you. How could something that does not exist at all can, serve any functional purpose? If something doesn't exist, how can you tell them, make me one chariot, buy me a chariot, bring me a chariot, something that does not exist? So how can you really, something does not exist means intrinsically, that's understood, right? How can you really, talk in that sense? So all those things, that you are kind of pointing out in our fallacies really belong to you, not to us. Because we say that a chariot simply exists as a merely imputed phenomenon, and it just functions fine at that level, So what we see are the really paradoxically antithetical viewpoints here. Right? Essentialists, Chitta-Martins and School Bros insist that things must exist in and of themselves, right? Intrinsically and substantively, yeah? And things has to be findable. That's their viewpoint, right? Position. And if things lacks intrinsic reality or existence, then they say that thing cannot exist, and then how a thing that doesn't exist serve its purpose, right? Now Chandrakirti and the Prasankika Madhyamikans, they refute intrinsic reality, which is an antithetical position, right? They say like, if things, if you insist things exist intrinsically, such a thing doesn't exist at all, right? So how can you again say that something that does not exist can fulfill a certain function or a purpose? That does not make any sense. So the two positions are very antithetical to one another. Now how do we decide? Well, that has to be individual, at the individual level, as Geshe says. So we also have to use our critical thinking. And for our own mind, we must decide which one really makes really sense, right? I mean, do we go with the essentialist position that things must exist intrinsically, something has to be findable, otherwise they cannot serve purpose, or do we go with the Prasankika Madhyamikans who insist that nothing exists intrinsically, but simply imputedly, yet they function, they serve purpose, right? Those are antithetical viewpoints. And we have to decide individually, personally for ourselves, which makes sense, and then, for our mind. So one of the contemporary Tibetan masters by the name of Amdo Gyeltsen, the Amdo means he came from the eastern part of Tibet called Amdo region. And he wrote a critique of Arya Nagarjuna's work called Lutup Konggen, which is the ornament of the Nagarjuna's work. In that critique, he tried to make a point that there is no such thing as a valid cognition, sema. At the end of the day, he said, how do we know something exists not? It all comes back to you. How do you see things? So at the end of the day, it all comes back to your perception. So therefore, he said there is no valid perception or cognition. And the things that we're discussing really are related to what he said.
that the Jedi was a third dinner to Mammy Beribadi year ago, the Ribada Jutakeda, not so more, but Semiju, Merush, found that Timame repair go say to so river see order. Mission that river to
So Lama Tsongkhapa, Je Rinpoche, the author of this Lamrim Chemo and other works, he said that, how do we make a final decision? It has to be dependent upon what we call the Timamebe Ripa, which is literally translating a stainless reasoning or very authentic, right, reasoning. And by that, he does not mean that based upon the authentic reasoning of some other person, right, you should find out authentic reasoning for yourself, and based upon that authentic, stainless, reasoning, you should make your decision, make your call, right? That's what the Jermo advises us.
Oh, this is it. That's the pen that jobs the Shaju Sim Gomes is in and then jobs in the period the Shaju Sim Gomnan Dior, the Koran Pasu, so Salvador. That Dame Guadella in this dear Sanje, dear Soviet, the embassy, Susan Yerman, the Penos on your mercy or that. Susan Samuel, Rodo Susan Nogora. Said that the Camdra, Shaju Sim Goya to the Dandi, Dame Neluti. The engine which is also Yamu told me, Sanjay in the song about that, and the bit person shaking my share, the pet omers.
No, so.
Tells you so the she would did that engine which is Chibaji that they did it.
So as our lineage masters, tell us that in the case of going for refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, its benefits, the benefits of the refuge practice, or benefits of cultivating bodhicitta, if we simply sort of more like believe in the words of the gurus or the teachers, and go for refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and try to cultivate bodhicitta, we will have certain benefit. We will accumulate certain merit. But when it comes to dealing with selflessness, the ultimate reality, simply relying upon Guru's words is not enough. You have to use your critical thinking, intelligence, and reasoning to find out what is and what is not. Because as long as at our personal individual level we have that misunderstanding or the lack of knowledge of what reality is, that reality, state of mind has to be eliminated by our own critical thinking and reasoning, understanding what is, whatever that is, So this is where we cannot simply say, well, selflessness is very important because Buddha said so, because he realized it. No, that doesn't work. He realized it, good for him, Did you realize it? Or do I realize it? No. So we have to come back to our own individual critical reasoning, thinking, authentic, to find out what is and what's not. In terms of bodhicitta development benefits, gurus say it's very beneficial, we believe in that, and we try to cultivate it, we still get some benefit, So when it comes to selflessness, it really depends upon one's own critical analysis, thinking, and one's own experience, personal. We cannot really simply go with others' experience and others' realization because Buddha said so or because he realized it,
Roji image repeats the teaching the money, but the Hinda Yoman is your Momo is Jeva de Tata Omabe Tomawa. They were no Omiloso, they were now started it. That in the same Zamba Menji take any Ranshi Moderna. And Chaji Gundi take my sedan, Chaji Gundi Gaga Shago or Shago, that Ranshin Togu do say, did Nathan Shineta Dugorwa.
No.
That almost the Carlasana. Any Ranshi Karsa de Motobna and Chaji made up it, Muma Naji Kela.
No.
That didn't do to say Malashin, the Taranta, Melkoron Dugorta, Muma and Raji Tumna. Madonna Chaji take the Rangi Togu to see Tata almost the Karasena and the Chaji to Rangi Togu, Rangi, Madra in the Yoma, said in the humors of said, that's an Muma Jari Rora. Almost the poor girl said it, I got you. Poor girl saying, Rocajoroa. Said that you did this to the unit, and he took all the same with the Vajik Pashe. 다 심자버스는 유니텐이 랑이 토고데 이제 네된 좀 랑이 토가 네대신 두고로
레는 거 제일 테로.
데 다다도 누가 되게 근데 랑이 뭐라 사진 메다비데 심자만 랑이시 인터가데 랑이 좋아메도 사진 메아시니 셰다 형어 좀 충어 좀 샤셔야 다 셰다 농로로
레는 좀. 알아오래 되게 가자 되게 샘sam보다 면제 되게 코 갈서 거라다 랑신 주가 켈렌데 여자 코 체다 체고 말아 다시 한번 되게 랑신 마도나 게 메고도 슬라버와
랑이 마도나 사진 메다비데 심자마 지과시로 심자마는 랑이 마도나 사진 되게 랑이 토고 니데 두고로 다데 엄마 사진 가가 충어마도 얘는 랑이 토고로 이 토고야도 심자마도 마지과시서 다데 왜서 장면해야 되라
This is so complex here. We're in the middle of page 283. So part of the response. So the essentialists, Chitta Martin's mind-only school and schools below, they insist that things must exist intrinsically, right, essentially. Otherwise, things cannot serve any function or purpose. Okay? So lack of characteristic existence or intrinsic existence for them is not feasible. If things don't exist intrinsically, right, then they could not exist at all. So therefore, what they decide, they accept things must exist intrinsically because they do serve purpose and function, right? So they are what we call eternalists in that sense. Now, here we refer to today's Madhyamika. I don't know, today doesn't mean, I think, contemporary necessarily at that time. But they are in even more precarious situation. So deep down in their heart, they really kind of go with the essentialist view, that things must exist intrinsically. But then they try to, how should I say, but for them, they couldn't say things exist intrinsically. They say that, things don't exist intrinsically, and for them it means they don't exist at all. So in that sense, these Madhyamikans, I have to say, these Madhyamikans, they have become a nihilist, worse than the essentialists. At least essentialists believe things exist, right, intrinsically, and they serve certain purpose. But these Madhyamikans, they become a nihilist, in saying that things don't exist intrinsically, so therefore they don't exist at all. So things only exist for our mistaken perception, but they really don't exist at all. You see, so that is even worse perspective or position than the essentialist. Are you with me so far? That's the distinction. The essentialists believe things must exist. They do exist essentially, intrinsically. But these Madhyamikans says that things only exist for our mistaken perceptions. In reality, they don't exist at all. So what does that mean? Well, they become a nihilist, worse than the essentialist.
Tienen dedan devan namla se don mesa tani be nansha tani sharme be chon joros tereta ene ta kara de tani be namsha de ene ribe ji tang dong jie ni ni be gang xiao gu ro wo de xiao ne ene karsa xiao me yin za ene don me tani be nansha se de xia ji kang ya 그런지 사실 향을 샤르메다 요는 이 리베지 니고는 이제 요마르와 지도 사실 그 샤토고 말이스
So now because these Madhyamikans insist that things exist for our mistaken perception, but in reality they don't exist. While if reality they don't exist, then you really cannot talk about cause and effect relationship. You cannot talk about functional purpose and functions, etc. So they are not able to assert the conventional reality, right? They cannot say things exist conventionally because for them, things only exist for our mistaken perception. In reality, they don't exist. So they become a nihilist, and their position is worse than the essentialists. At least essentialists say that things exist and they must exist. They exist intrinsically, right?
No, did that. Don't you no more you run maybe never run messages. Run never say nothing to number doing you to you number you didn't run a lot in Doba, she ever did them by shadows. Start wrong than never me Carsana in the thousands and year me rushing in Motovina in a desert. Number do you number you didn't this number much in the Jiding a tiny timber. 那然后赢了，现在的新的赢了，那新的赢了的新人多吧？的那些学考的考验的，然后那些成绩得了大呢，那特别当时就有你，看着下头也当，下些天就是刚刚想那已经没去别个，那他都就为这个技术的先下个嘛的，嘛的嘛些吧，今天他也他妈下说过的，其实他听就用没事吧？
So to the bottom of page 283, we have a quote from Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way, and that quote substantiates Prasangika Madhyamikan's position. That is, things are imputedly existent. They don't exist intrinsically or essentially, but they exist conventionally, and conventionally means without analysis, people accept, right? In a very conventional, things exist, things perform functions, but not in the sense of ultimate analysis that things have to be findable, under that kind of analysis. So on that level, on that imputed existent level, Prasangika Madhyamikan says that things are just fine, just like a chariot. A chariot does not exist in and of itself, but conventionally, a chariot exists, right? It is dependent upon its parts, the 7 parts that we just talked about, right? A chariot is nothing but something that is labeled, merely labeled, imputed onto the collection of its parts. And at that level, it functions fine. But if you try to locate intrinsically existent chariot, there is no such chariot, And so therefore, the Prasangika Madhyamikan says that all the fallacies that essentialists are trying to point out in their position really belong to them, not to the Prasangika Madhyamikans themselves.
Kelema ne rashi yume chebe se rigbe cheba mengi rigbe naba cheba te toni jiden tanye be shiva ranga e yume zangi cheba ino se shedan tere da she di chong de yo mare standa de chaji te ganga karisha ne tazon se ne shago mare se mada maji ba kono de ngal shago ri tazon se ne rigbe kiso na 되게 코치에 매번 더 토고 말이스. 근데 강사 따동 전에 강사 이야기 말아. 이제 강사 열어. 어디 너도 말이스. 안에 따동 전에 많이 내는 거 강사 여다네 그래서 마다 맞아. 지대 타니 에 리지 통소사 리지 라고도 세야도 리지 로고도 세야 어떻게 잡게 인자고 그래서.
So Geshe's explanation pertains to what you see at the end of page 283 and over page 284. So things, according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, do not exist, intrinsically, or in the sense of something findable under ultimate analysis. Even though nothing is findable under ultimate analysis, that does not mean things don't exist at all. For example, a person or a self, is not findable under ultimate analysis, but that does not mean a self or a person does not exist at all. A self or a person exists. How conventionally its existence is established by the conventional valid cognitions, isn't it? Not from the point of view of ultimate valid cognitions, but from the point of view of conventional perceptions. In conventional perception, people say legend is the name of a person, right? Hey, did you see legend? Yes. Can you ask him to come? Okay, sure. Well, he's not there. So conventionally, from a conventional perception point of view, such a person called legend exists. You can call him, you can just, talk about him. But in an ultimate sense, there's not something findable as that person, So that's the big distinction. Things are imputedly existent. Nothing is findable under ultimate analysis. In the conventional world, when people talk about this and that and all of that, that's in a very conventional sense, from conventional perspective, not from the ultimate perspective,
어디 가서 내가 좀 줘봐 얘는 되는 네 조주네 랑 얘는 난 때네 세 답을 따요도 줘봐 이놈 뭐세 답은 저 따요서 인세야 되지 어때 게됐는 저베 되다 나버지와 리과디 신다 많이 베다 랑 우저 러시 매매제 티 얘라 나네 나시 여드냐는 여도 냐는 number 7 teola se nema so kyene shege shawa shege se ta di da de zuwa hida shoma da se this wa da hinda kona yenla de da sha yin ze ko da yu yin se na di ro was ce yenla da di cha re kan kona de ji yin ze diye de ne rang xin chu gu re se da di zui ba ji ro wa da tu lai ne di shi da ge ne be zui ba de ne tab yu xiu re se wa da ga ji number was me 600 in the telenalia nemaso jiwareso number 600 nemashita ingayo marwa uti jamu de kaje titwa de da kaje thon de be twa mare la wa da
So we are on top of page 284 and so the point is this, that things are merely labeled or merely imputed. That's how things exist. Yeah? Nothing is findable until ultimate analysis. But that does not mean things don't exist at all. They exist conventionally, and so they serve their purpose, whatever the purpose is. So in the case of a chariot is dependent upon its parts, and chariot is a label given onto the collection of its parts. Yeah? So at that level, the chariot exists, it serves its function. But if you try to find out chariot, among its parts, individually or collectively, you cannot locate something that is a chariot, okay? Because a chariot is not intrinsically existent, it's not findable under that analysis, but that does not mean that the chariot doesn't exist. It exists imputedly and conventionally. And so another qualm or objection raised is that some critics believe that each of the 7 parts of the chariot must exist intrinsically, and the response to that is, it's just that's they consider as almost like a useless objection, and because it is almost saying that once you burn a whole piece of cloth, not try to find the threads in the ashes of a cloth, that makes no sense at all. So how can somebody say that each part of the chariot must exist intrinsically? So they said that objection has no valid basis.
新的原因第一啦，见面天啦见面接什么的，也啦见面的新的家没被切入是，就是他，你新的可能给没有接受的他，第一下些也啦，第一的他，也啦见面的，也啦在用嘛吧，本来，手机面的手机用过的啦，我用嘛吧，现在他。 신다 거나 연락 제인데 거라 이 메시지는 디 차이에 연락을 러이 해야 돼. 어쩌로 다디 남부 가서 집에 텔알 내면서 직벌이 요 말이죠.
So when we think in terms of a whole and its parts, if a whole doesn't exist intrinsically, how can you insist that its parts must exist intrinsically? That makes no sense, A whole is dependent upon its parts are dependent upon its entirety, collectivity, right? And so one cannot say that the whole doesn't exist intrinsically, but its parts must exist intrinsically. That kind of objection is just, senseless objection.
개대 미대의 신다 시원은 바로 평로에서 왜 여러 속바 미비시냐는 되는데 나 신다 통화 코니 평로에서 봐다 신다 있느냐는 진지 현인은 민진도 어디서 다 그것은 데서 아니 신다에 데서래 신다 시바나 평로에서 왜 여러 속바 미비시 이 신다 연락 现代现在呢，碰到 loss 的，这的都没有写入是呢，这嘛是，俺现代通呢，你现代人啦，就是下到通呢，就是现代吧，都多少呢？现代人啦的，可咋的，确实就是了，现代人啦的嘛的这些呢，俺们的现代人啦的，和使用在底下呢，现代人啦都是老旧嘛的，这通嘛就呢，这里现代人啦都是老旧嘛的是，我的旧嘛是我的。 新的原来人看就在这，新的可能比较这边的新的啥子讲了，有个的新的原来晓得吧？比如蹦下来的新的原来晓得吗？
So our critique says that when you dismantle a chariot, right, you can see its different parts. Here's the wheel, here's the spoke, here's the axle, whatever things may be. So therefore, they think that it exists intrinsically. But the response to that question is, each of those parts is regarded as a part of a chariot because, that is the part of that concept. A chariot, that whole idea of the concept, right, consists of 7 parts at least, isn't it? And so when you dismantle it, still people can identify, well, that is the wheel, right? That is the axle, that is the spoke, But if in the first place, those things have never been made into a wheel, part of a wheel, nobody can say, well, that is part of a chariot because, it isn't, So what that tells us, that even when you dismantle the parts of a chariot, we identify them as a part of a chariot. That shows the dependent nature, existence of a chariot. A chariot is dependent upon its parts are dependent upon the chariot as a whole, So that identification shows the relativity and, dependent existence.
신다시와 뒤에서 펑로로는 신다든 저음에 비해서 신대인라 마인소 되다 신다버 토네 에네 거사 디 콜로다 디도 소소도 유나 엔디 신단 저요 뭐 신대인라 마레스 뒤에 연라지 신다메자 신다 거사 디 연라 여바 마인노스 제대 디 신대인라 마레스第一新的个呢，人那等人那经你好像没讲是，碰了那么让个吃些呢，对人那经人啦，吃些得能的人那因为是人那真没为，人那就把美女说是，我的人那真人那的人那真的那下，人那真的人那真的下，平时多这个错误那个小什么就，说他的人那真的人那真的人那谁要嘛的吧，我的下要嘛是。
So when you look at a chariot as the whole, it has different parts. So the chariot, for lack of a better word in English, itself is a part possessor, right? It has many parts, and its parts are part of that whole chariot, isn't it? So we have the part and part possessor, and there is a dependent relationship between that which has parts and parts that are part of that, whichever the whole thing is. I know it's strange to say in English that way, but but if we, completely dismantle the chariot and just put the whole parts in a collection, that collection of parts is not called a chariot. The chariot has to be fitted into the whole thing. That's called chariot, right? If we dismantle every part, we know it's part of the chariot, but the collection of the parts is not a chariot.
现在人那这边呢，人那没被同的呢，新的城呢，人那没被是，路面人那就是人那可接送呗，别说呢，写不下我是这个，可是现在人那这边呢没被同呢，呢，可是没同呢，新的城呢，人那没被显示，如果在新的没城上呢，地人那这些我们是，但路面人那就是人那可是。로미스는 로에 메스는 다 담에도 셔름 지고로 뒤다 뉴스 파 식다니 에네 뒤 샤시도 디그마르 세 메로
할레노
오티인게 로미 연라 세디 컨데 다 동유도 셔라게 엔디 뉴스 파 메오 소드 지고로 아니 뉴스 디 샤시도 디그마르 다 컨지 뉴스 코나 아마도 메서는 그 차이 디그마르 와 오티인세
So we have a quote from Chandrakirti's commentary on the Middle Way on page 284, and the explanation on that is, and if a chariot is completely burned down, right, then its parts could not exist at all. So a chariot and its parts are dependent upon each other for their existence. And the next line, where there's mention of the fire of analytical mind, it says that if we generate the wisdom of selflessness, emptiness, and if the fire of that wisdom, burns all of our delusions, afflicted emotions, then no individual delusion could exist anymore, right? If the root delusion is uprooted, all other delusions which are dependent upon the root could not exist at all. Just like when the chariot is burned, its parts could not exist, right? In the same way, when the root delusion is uprooted or burned by the fire of wisdom, then all other delusions, which are secondary, so to speak, dependent, could not exist on their own.
어디 다 숨바 맹기 채워주고는 주지네. 중대에 초원디 지대는 잡고는 힘대 타인도 봐. 제서 저 멋이도 마세지 니 맹기 채워를 거다임부터 넘버 제범에 봐. 지대는 잡고는 kel로 샤오. 데다데 팅이 연락 준비 차시지. 힘대 팅이 15년도 줘. 15년도 저예 교남라 lembo yudu zhou jie su mo da ro sa da di wen zha da第二个咱明给敲过是吧？现在打东北打过是这样子，但是得别看到过些是吧？说今天这边过呢，现在他人到我介绍的，现在当中在那满年呢，今天这边过呢，呢也被现在他人叫我的那少，不是就被车去台湾不是马赛，明给敲把看到人把他讲明个人呢。number 这边没有，今天的这边过呢，那开上了小五三，我这但现在就不没有些，但可能去可能的每个学吧可能他number 这边没有了，你今天这边过呢，现在的韩国这是吧？现在就没有些是吧？
And so at the bottom of page 284, we have a third subpoint which reads how to establish the chariot under various names. And so what Geshe explained is this, that things are merely imputed, taksam, merely labeled, and so we should accept the things as existent just the way it is known to the world. Right? In a conventional sense, things are existent for the world. World use different labels and conventionals to refer to them, talk about them. But they have done that without any analysis, right? Without any kind of ultimate analysis. They simply talk in a very conventional sense, and that's how the things exist, and that's how things should be accepted.
뭐 그래서 대어만 주발때서 대다데 디니 연락진의 차시지 연락진의 차시지 차시의 연락의 차시 신의 디니로 연락의 저 처벌 때는 이 신자세는 지대는 그 타인도 그래야 돼와 기운은 15년도 없어요. 어디다 들에서 내내 연락도 소도 가가지고 유ten지 가가지고 신다래서 이 연락이 그 신다 계시 그 접시 때下인데 15보 정말을 셔거와 신다디 여야디 연락이 소되는 거 신다 셔거로 디디디 연락이 이 신다 접시 소리 셔거와 어디 15년도 접시야 되지 제송받다 대한 신대 평로서 연락 사이에 차이제다 제다 그래서 연락제도 차이제 협의세 타이도 로봇에 다 연락진서는 말에 연락진서는 신다시 저 아마도지다 본바디 연락진시로 다 차이제에서는 알레 연락제에서는 연락진시의 장라 연락 사이인데 다 차이제에서 협의 타이기 통조부서 차이제나 연락제에서 비치기버래샤 차이제에서 다 연락지도디 차이제 연락 집어줘로 또 저가가 어디 땡땡 편집 때문에 거는 줘버리시
So that I think citation from Chandrakirti's explanation middle way at the bottom of page 284, it tells us that in the case of a shingda, a chariot, right, when all the necessary causes and conditions to make a chariot have assembled together, right, put a chariot together, so that thing is simply labeled in the world as a chariot, isn't it? So so that shows us the dependent nature of a chariot. A chariot is dependent upon its parts are dependent upon a chariot. A whole and its parts are interconnected and related, relationally dependent upon each other for their existence. So in a sense, all the causes and conditions which make a chariot, these are the agent or the creator of the chariot. These have created what the chariot is.
어제 대신에 평로라 속바 녀활렘비 샤왈 때니 혼자 수 좋은데 엔터니 쉐와보다 거기 신다야 신다 때거 녀활렘발라 때니 녀활렘비 맹기 타니 다바 샤오 런데 가시 연화제의 차시 내가 좀 얘기 대달에 타태발 마음이 시리 연화제의 차시지 매와 뭐다 시러와다들 연화다 차시들 연화데 차시세야 되네 요머들 되게 가지 누구에서와 가자 매와 뭐다 대신에 레바히 얘기 시와보네 매바다세 다 레바히 예세야 돼 대인자리 le zezo kaza le kaza doye tsijor da shibabo memiso kar le yose jore di jidon yewe de wo mar da le baji zezo yose rangshin yose wo da shibabo so na tagu ro shibabo memiso na kansa tagu de so ro ko zezo yo mar ko chagi mo ro da ro ta le se dis da de 지도 셈레샤네 시바라와 시바이는 제제비 차라와 고고마로 셔
레디들 단단 가서 된대지 연락 중이나 레츠
어때서 찍바래다 레카데 가서 샤와 지다 도고 샤와 가르치나 찍바래 레세야지 요라와 어때 다다디 레세야데 나중에 레데래 다 레사게 가자 되가래 제스 메시데 메시데 타지데 메드시고 말해 제스 메시 어디 레더 남이 얘기 시바보데 미믹소스 원도에 롱이도 어디 디께서 시기도 와 제가 다 차시 제네 제스 차시도 가르제 레드 제스요데 시바보데 강사데 요 말이야 어디 메바다 시바보 메세야데 요 타이데 바시고 말다 제스 메바스 먼저 강사들 가래 먼저 가르사 땅유다 다다 롱지 메시 강가 인샤오라 로 다봉제 세이의 식샤 근데 강사 땅유지 그거 메그 통하다 깨져샤 여기 강사 땅유지 그러 다 꼭문에 저 딩마도 내가 거리서 제디는 인자린도 시벨링도 다 강사 문에도 시바래 가자죠 어디 다 가르세요 다 지요 있어 때 레도 어디 계세리 거제 거사도 땅유시 근데 레드 지요 있어 근데 샤시도 저 가도 땅유 샤시도 다 지요 있어 되시고 살아
오케이 강사 가자 사실 오늘 이게 차시의 제인 차시진 제인이라면 강사 따위라면 되게 말게
라
차시진 제인이라면 말게 강사 따위라면 되는 게 누구 말게
차시진세데
차시의 거랑 변한 레드 제인이면 이게 차시의 제인이면
다 비딩이래 차시의 제 차시진세 메시아이
어디로 강사 따위
어디 강사 따위로
So we are on top of page 285. The Geshe's explanation is, some, let's say, critiques. They assert that parts of a chariot are what called intrinsically existent, but not the chariot as a whole. Okay, chariot as a whole is a part possessor. Part possessor is imputed phenomenon, but its parts are substantially existent, which is the same as intrinsically existent. Okay? And why they said that, I think they make some reference to certain statements in the sutra, which Geshe quoted from, I think is from memory, where the statement literally seems to say that a person, Kangsa, self, is an imputed phenomenon, okay? But actions of a person are substantially existent, which means intrinsically existent. Okay? And so based upon that kind of a statement, so they claim that a chariot as a whole, right, is an imputed phenomenon, but chariot in its parts are substantially existent, intrinsically existent. Just as a person is an imputed phenomenon, not substantially existent, a person's actions, which really refers more to the action in the sense of a state of mind, right? When we talk about 12 dependent originations, we have karmic formation, so that action, they're considered as substantially existent. Zesto means intrinsically existent.
nhiều nhiều nó bên này xin được mà thế đó là yala là sao nó sẽ mấy cái chuyện xe rồi thế là cô nên chụp bắt chỉ đến chắc bị con dâu mà chỉ sống số thế nó thông thường bên đây yala trên là sao mấy cái yala sao bây giờ mấy là con dâu thì yala sao bây giờ thế yala trên là sao ba yala trên là sao ba chắc bị con dâu mà là chỉ sống số si ta tim ta ti de chagi bi yela je yela me se ado ti de chagi se ayo ta dong ze ne inga yo ma res ji de chang su shin ne yela ye de yela je ga ga yo ro wa o di yela je ga ga yo res yo la kun zo de ne yela la so ye ba ta yela je la so ba yo ba ma ni de ba ni su le le ma nya ba yin no sa o da ti de se ne ta dong ze ne me 아니 연락전 사실 연락전 사실 미 아니 딱도 맞는 연락전 사실 강가 간제 그 지대 교수는 희시나 어때 신은 아니 대만이자 냠고요 말이지.
So in essence, if we go with what is renowned in the world, Gyeltsen Chakpa, what is conventional in the world, and that what's known in the world is that a whole is dependent upon its parts conventionally, and its parts are conventionally dependent upon its whole. So that kind of interdependent relationship, how should say, defines whatever the thing is and its existence. Then we will be able to assert both truths, the true truths, and we will not have any problem with the concept or the notion of the dual truth, the true truth. If you go with what's known in the world, how things exist conventionally, because nobody in the world, they assert anything based upon ultimate analysis or some kind of ultimate application, that things have to be findable, in some sense, that people talk in the world in a very conventional sense from their conventional perspective. If you go with that, what's known in the world, then we will have no problem asserting the two truths, the conventional truth and ultimate truth. That's my footnote. Okay.
Well, the stuff is the something you got the pages that was in the irritation.
So Geshe, since that's a good place to stop today, and we welcome your questions or we need to clarify things, anything.
Okay, so I heard about some meditation techniques where, for example, if I imagine everyone is a skeleton, something to, stop attachment, and the whole world is like just with skeletons, covered with skeletons, then that is, in my mind, it's real because I'm imagining, I'm doing this for a meditation technique, right? But then that's not really reality, is it? Because I think Geshe was mentioning before, you have to know what's real for you and use your own critical thinking and experience. But as this is just a technique, and it's clear that we're not all skeletons, if that is appearing that way to my mind from a lot of practice this way, then can't I say that is not really real, even though it appears to my mind like that?
The Quran condition the this again that again did the Java again given the Tame in Nelu Chudu Kalaya and so similar again. Doctor Chenamato Jig Sanye Sumber, the Nation Share Sumber Wagan. So Sugi and Lolia, Takasor, Dirwag, a lot of them was Seku or Sumber Wagan. This is the kind of social long while Karayu in Arabagan, and then the Yovich Chogi, Penang on the Sachi King Rukabiting is a Kumgo again. La Sachi King Rukabiting is it. So the Miss Hamalota King Ru, some did you call the way initially Miss Sama King Ru the Marabas or again. In a social decably com, Gab de Ducana, social now the same de la Sachi King Rukanter again. King said the King Ru, social similar the King Ru shadow there, the Dungo Natural King Ru Marabas or again. ngui ne jul kare yime de kande so ta che tu re so ro ge
알레
so sem kombe ong ta king ru re de ro wa yene ta ngui ne jul che na king ru ma re mi kang sa re de ro ge
야레
cha so sem wal ta se chen sha ku yime de ro ge
야레
and tembe ngui bo di re da di ma re se de kande ye sam che ur su ro ge
뭐 다다데 지거 사이 그르 샵세 거야 되데 소소 비게 세고 내일 사이 그르 인마다 요 말하고 그 여자 체모들 인디니 몰래 그르 곰세야 저러와 또 소소 고수 파 당보 소소 세네 고수 그르 곰으로와
yene de ko ngui ne ju cha yo ma ro da
왜 차요 말와 왜 차요 말데 지나 거 늦어지고 있다 아니 그르 곰도 잘 아니 늦어서야 돼이 용을 용하는데 그르서야 됐다 그게 착사기 무유로 되게 매우 소샤이서 인도자도 오러와 이 소수 쇠는 고물 뭐지 다 고문지 다 인삼도 사운데 뭐지 그걸 리베지하시나 인디 탐지 그 거기는 인삼도 요 말아 내가 그 고모가 내가 그걸 여자도 내가 그걸 뭐하시 때 고물 뭐지 그걸 리베지하시 긴리들이 좀 요 말아 요 말아 단다듯이 그다음 오늘 장사듯이야 된다 ene semzamba heda jigda omo hisayi ene ngone garre야 돼 소소 그게 힘죽시에네 ene 소소 세명 요거랬어요
다 ngui ne ju kare
ong에 저저
sem suebe ke jama da ngui ne ju
다 제일 뭐지 ene 텐지와디 인송야스 다티 인지에서 디네시는 편도 말했어요
So what Geshe says is that the example you gave about how in certain meditation practice, in order to counteract our grasping attachment, we visualize that the whole surface is filled with skeletons, that is our own imaginative creation. In reality, the surface is not filled with skeletons, and that really goes against what is renowned in the world. The surface is filled with human beings, not a skeleton, But it serves certain purpose because we are usually attached to things or people who are very beautiful and attractive. But skeleton is not considered something attractive. If we visualize the whole surface filled skeleton, it helps us to overcome and reduce our attachment because nobody gets attached to skeletons, So it serves that purpose. It serves that temporary purpose. For some specific reason, we imaginatively created it, but that's not reality. In reality, if we ask the people, like, do you think the world is full of skeletons? But people will say, what? Are you okay? All right, so it's going to go against what is renowned in the world. But in the case of what we call dealing with selflessness or emptiness, right, it's different because emptiness is not artificially created reality. It is what is, right, how things actually exist. Now, we have two perspectives at least now. According to mind-only school, Chitta Martins, and schools below, they insist that things must exist intrinsically in and of themselves, right? If things were to lack intrinsic existence, then they could not exist at all, but that's not how it is, because things exist. I experience it, right? So according to Pasanghika Madhyamikans, yes, things exist, but they don't exist the way we think they exist. They do not exist intrinsically. That's how we think they exist. They exist imputedly, right, and conventionally. And so now which is what? Who has got the truth of the matter, so to speak? We are in the middle of these two different antithetical perspectives, right? And how do we make a judgment? So this is where Lama Tsongkhapa advises us that we use our best of the critical intelligence analysis to find out what is the reality, not the artificial reality to be created, but what is, right? And you can simply say, because Lama Tsongkhapa said that Pasanghika Madhyamika has got it right, and that's the way to go. Well, that's just simply following somebody's statement. We just ourselves have to sit in the middle and look at the thing as best as we could and use our critical intelligence and arrive at a decision. Do the essentialists make more sense now? Or not only make more sense, is that what the truth is? Or what the Pasanghika Madhyamika said, that's the truth is. So this is where we have to establish it for our own mind. But that reality is not an artificial reality. It is the how things actually exist. So those two things are two different things. Skeleton imagination created one for a certain reason, but that's not really reality. But the emptiness or selflessness is a reality.
제 곰동 그런 저거 말던데 김류 곰세도 내자 그냥 뭐 곰에 당보 리바 중중중 곰 근데 리바 셔를 싫었다 엔티네 바 야긴 때 김류 밑으로 소수 팔레 쇠는 곰샤로 와
No, really.
다 돈이 줘야 돼 말봐 유코란 니도 뭐네 가르도 와 어디 있다 심지어.
So our approach in meditation to skeletons and emptiness is completely different, right? In the case of skeleton, because we say, okay, I have a problem with attachment to people, attractive thing. So then what you start doing is you started to maybe visualize a kind of small skeleton, and then you kind of enlarge it. Then you think the whole surface filled with skeleton, the yucky ones, whatever, and then that helps us to deal with attachment, But that's just our own fictitious creation. That's not such thing. But in the case of emptiness, we are not trying to create something. We're trying to understand how do things actually exist. Things do exist. We don't disagree with that. But the question we have is, do they exist from their own side, or do they exist in some other fashion, right? That's we're trying to, I should say, try to understand the reality as it is. We are not trying to create something here, Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, so it's a follow-up to this question. Does Geshe say that the appearance of skeletons doesn't exist even clearly? It does not exist ultimately, but is he saying that it does not exist even conventionally?
If you think the whole surface is filled with
Yes,
skeletons,
and just
I will check with him.
hypothetically, well,
Okay.
that's a kind of the preamble to the question. But let's say a whole bunch of monks meditate on. Yogis meditate on that, and to every one of them, the Earth's surface appears as though filled with skeletons. Then there is total agreement. That means that because conventionally means by agreement, that means that things like that exist conventionally.
Right. Okay.
And a follow-up question: what about dreams? Individual are they conventionally existent? What about hallucinations?
Sure. Kona condition did that, and the surgical thing is in Rogan. Thing the same with Chun, Comsha, or the Jag in Yamborowag. Dear Labducana can, Kona Siducalia. When I search some chicken but now so that Trimber again. Siducalia, and now on the and a Karasoko Tanya to Yoma, the best again. Such can you come now? Sure, now the Tanya to Yoma, the best, and can read the almost already. They didn't even a time and I can do Mongoshi again, some chicken rook up things to go much again. Some log such a can rook up a ton, Consequent get it in a such a can rook count the vessel, consequent count to slug was again. She did Kangalog that Mudin the Mason Jumin on the Jigden Travers to go Mudin on the Shago Marvesa. He may not such a can rook up a shago was.
So the Buddhist is you can count the trade of Shavina, you can count the Langmar, so pig, come to Menal by. Yes, said to Gomrava. I said, go never to go Hako. Same dingling when is some of the Yomara. Nico Guvia, but today some of the Jagard away, to same day shot, come to
Now the yours.
no idea. No idea.
What Geshe say in the case of skeletons, the appearances do exist, but not the skeletons, as a reality. The appearances of skeletons exist, and then you ask a bunch of meditators, right, who meditate the same thing, right? You ask them, do you see, how to say, the appearance of skeletons? They will all agree. But if you say, do you think the whole surface is filled with skeleton? Nobody will say yes, because they will say no. Yes. So I think in their meditative state, they see the appearances, but they know in reality that's not what it is.
So what about the dreams?
Yeah, I was a Milam Nalar again. Milam Naliang on the music Damara Tonda again. That Temba Yimba Temba Minizu or again. They can just sometime with us. Milam Nalia again, dear Wadaji Carson, Dram and the Chubiaton was in a true edge or what. Young one edge in Guru, the conditions.
Minum that one is that minimum de la Cheda, that minimum is a Chida Chasha, the young Yilum Kadi also the big Casa. 상행이 개발되는 minimum 특이야 되대 용되고 봐. 다들 소생 그게다 송년즈 소리 샤시. 뭐바도 용주. 어디대지 다 아니 샤시. 네 되지 때는 인 중글 가시 양민은 다야요다. 폐자되지는 다야서 말아. 다 가이야 다야요. 때지 용거로. 어디다 그 가르서 뭐번 중글디
So dreams are, quite complex. Geshe says, usually we use the dreams as an example, how things are unreal in a sense, right? But then there are certain dreams that are indicative of what is likely to happen for you in the future. And in some cases, that's very much true. It looks like in your dream state, you have this intuitive sense of what's going to happen, and then you see that it really happens, So dreams are quite complex in that sense,
Well, my question was, are they conventionally existent phenomena? And it seems to me that they are not, because the definition of something that conventionally exists, it has to be or validly established, valid cognition.
Right.
Are they validly established? Because they are in principle, they are not being. It's not possible for them to be refuted by another valid cognition, and that's one of the requirements for something to be validly established. And yet they seem to exist.
먼저 남유가서 오다 타녀도 요어에서 라비나 게르와 타녀 요바 샤고 좀 가보쳐 그러와서 가서 남주 타녀 레버지긴 직전을 타버와게 타고 가서 디 처마신 그만에 봐서 망고슬라고 그러와 제도 갈때 미람나 요데버디 요바 샤투 그러 말했어 그러와
알레 밀는 요바데 노데 미주지레 문에 자자다 샤토 뭐라 베면 랑보스야 되보다 국직 그 상해도 망보지 용하여로 지금 지자 세로시고 요저 양상도 배 시다자 이거서 드리드가 요마로 요도 요마로 너와도 여러
나와도 샤투 거
너와도 샤투 거다
마도 지기디
동문에 그 예와도 샤투 뭐로
Yeah, some things we see usually in the dream state with the hallucination or any other dreams, we could only establish the existence, the appearances, not in reality. You're right, because the other valid cognitions, cannot certify their existence. Yeah. Yes, Alan.
So, okay, now I don't know all the rules about
Sure.
Buddhist cognition or whatever.
Right.
But in what you just said, what about when an inventor dreams of an invention? It already exists in his mind. It's just not transmuted in physical reality.
Right.
What
is that, right? Yeah. Ala kona this ko again da kanto de wa chala saba so gen yor wa gen nambo kona so tokbe nal ji sha de gor wa chala ma so ngan din de so ko sam wa ina ngoy ne chalo yo ma de shuma di samla na yo be ba laglen ta ni gyujen sa yin de ko ne cha do gor wa sa din de samlo de la kal la ko de da ngoy so yo re ngoy so do ma so wa chala saba kan se samlo ko ina ta da ge yo ma ko tok so ra ba ge ma am ba lo ko gyujen san de so yin gor wa se din de samlo di 아니 갈라고다 댐병 오버스레 그 댐벌 서저와게
아리 자 데데데와 또번데 몽가가 유지시를 해야 되러와 다다디 속어서 해야 되지 몽바래 여러와 레여와
나네
신나 다 몽바 용지데 나시 그다 서로 또번은 레토와
나네
그래서 데라데네 인 거티 시자신 인다다 그런 또벌이요 나시 중앙 서터 쳐워라
나네 얘네 또번에 다 샤데디
샤데디 통지해야 된다
든지디 열다 이는 꼭 잘라둔 거 스튜디오
잘라도 거 여디요 뭐 잘라 통지도 열아 이제 속에서 내는 지는 다 이해도 속다 간데 있는 건가 롱차요로 그 통지시기로
So in the case of such imaginative mind, inventors, the creators, they think about creating new stuff. So which are not yet here. It's something about the future. That's why at the conceptual level, we can think about the past, present, and future, in all ways. So when they think about something they want to create new, in their mind, they have that concept and conceptual image. That's what we call generic image or the tunchi, But in reality, that thing doesn't exist yet. But because they already thought about the design, the shape, and all of those things. But then in the future, they find the actual materials to make it up, right? Then that becomes reality, right? But at the moment, it's just a conceptual image or a thought. Yeah. So, yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
It has to do with the concept of time, as you were mentioning.
Yeah.
In the philosophy that we just kind of talked through here, are we always considering now? Like the chariot could be chariot now, before it could be something else, in the future it could be something else. When we're examining reality, are we always examining as it is now?
This is now, okay. 코로나 간에 쉬어야 돼 이렇게 당한 저 뒤에 개발셔로 와게 뒤에 대마다도 선수들과 가서 남주다 되기 최 강한 로마지기 다칼라 올게 데메 그거벌 제 주고 왜나로 와게 최대 단다 강 인심으로 와게
아래
리에 삼다마도 최대 마음바 가르쳐가면 하고 말어 와게
아래
최대 대발 가리면 하고 말어 와
아래
최대 단다 거랑 가리면 다가랑 저다 뒤스도 뒤 다다 받치고 저 삼다한테 걸어서 오게
뒤에서야 돼.
나디 주고 가리나 단다 제주 지금이나 딱지 지금이나 다다 유에심에 뒤에 마도 지금 와게
아래
최대 그 마음 봤으니까 최대 그 대발 생각데 게 삼당 요 말어 와서 먼저
아래 내가 뭐 상당 거. 근데 뒤som 샤그라.
마 뒤도 좀 제가 근데 저 배나 단다 까요도 이게 다음에 삼을 다음에 와게
아래
까요 단다 가리면 말 까요도 마음 발이야 까요 멤버 차스리 캔자 차스기로 와게
이제
디 삼을 당겨 말 까요 디 대변 거를 삼을 당겨 말 까요 코나 다 랑신 주면 단대 까요 디 까요 다가나
어
삼을 당도 걸서 최근 어떤
알레
공개
다 남다 거서 상단 단다 까이티 라 뒤som 동요. 그거 까이 단다 거랑 랑신 저요 말봐. 니마 거랑 이 단다 마도래야 요 말봐.
알아
산다 마오반도 거랑 이 저래도 말봐.
알아
그도 뭐 다다 그다가도 동바 이제 섬에 뭐뭐 섬셔도 들으셔고 와.
알아
까이들 때는 코는 산다 유행해마시. 다그 소데베 내가 까이도 요 말디 마오 쓰고 까이도 마오 그래요. 그러와
그래
다 다다다 그 예의 대신다 드네바 중자 가르려 그 하고 말아 다데 그러와 다 차서는 대버려 살아
그래
그게 지금 윤도도 도도 거다 그 차서는 그 대버리려
이제
말이야
뒤숭발 삼을 땅 고고요 말 다네 디고
라.
인지 미지 땅 고고 말
요 말이야 뒤숨도 간지 뭐 가는 뒤숨 요요래 뒤숨 요라 그게 지금 유거라 뒤숨이 그 디데 그 가서 주례산 셔고도 뒤차도 거라
What Geshe says that with regard to any object or phenomenon, we can always talk about the three times: its past, in what it is now, present, and its future. And so when we let's say if we're thinking, I use the cup as an example. Otherwise, you have to have something concrete. If we're analyzing the selflessness of this cup, right? What we have now is this cup now, but we can think about its past because there had never been a cup that was intrinsically existent, and there will never be a cup that it will be intrinsically existent. So in that sense, we can think about three times, right, with reference to a cup. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay,
Yes.
If not, we'll stop there today and do our prayers and dedication. So I'm here next week again, and then the week after I have to go to DC. So one more week to continue this. Tunda shuma diki nga de yero.
Yes.
Nanti shuma de DC do go again.
Yes.
Kange lo de jinye de nyinda namda rabse shinye de ro shije seje nyije toga lebo kanda sebe zara mare mendo donge yese rozo kunla boje yala doje yande zo doda chero yemo nyelo leje charo doje mare meze donge yogo shinye chenze raje na dene daje saju yende lunzo nyase tu go chuda chuda
chunye yere dalu meze
jambe yangla de omara badana omara bazana de senden köye kera vese ge dalu temu mumba rasene kada denje sholo lo de bove na sendo lo de jaze udon bega de gezan ponve chudo memba denba zenla wando yesho be tanye shogun jol so on de. Could you start Manjushri, please? Yeah, pray. Guru Rana Mandela Niyan Daya